Hello class, I'm glad you're with me for Photo and Design Workshop. We're going to have some fun in this class. My name is Dr. Tom Hallaq. You can call me Doc Hallaq. Some people just call me Tom. I'm pretty casual about that. I just want to have you here and have some fun while we discover the workings of Photoshop. So that's what this class is all about. We're going to dive in, learn Photoshop, get really comfortable with it from an artistic standpoint as well as a visual design standpoint. So we want to help you use the tool for both applications and really just get comfortable with it. Now, I know some of you already have an artistic background. That's great. Some of you have already dabbled in Photoshop. That's awesome that you've had that opportunity. And I'll take a look at your pretest, which you've just completed before getting to this point. So we'll dive in and we'll dig deeper into what Photoshop can do for you in all sorts of different applications. We will have a lot of fun, I surely hope. First thing I want to do is I want to kind of get in and share with you what this class is about. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll be doing that quite a bit as we get going, and I'm going to dive into our little PowerPoint. So again, I want to welcome you to the fabulous Photo and Design Workshop. We're going to have a lot of fun and hope you come along with me for a lot of that fun. So what is this class about? What have you gotten yourself into? Hopefully you're excited about this. Like I mentioned just a moment ago, the basics of this class, we're going to learn the interface and techniques of Photoshop. And Photoshop is one of those tools that that is used quite extensively professionally. We want you to be a part of it and want you to feel comfortable in using this software. Okay, the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn some real basic design principles in photo manipulation. Again, I know some of you are coming from the art department, some of you are coming from other backgrounds where you've already got some good basic design principles, maybe some more advanced design principles, and that is great. We're just going to touch base on some of the basics today, and as we move through the images and the lessons that we do here. So we're not going to get real deep into the principles. We just want to kind of get an idea to guide us as we create some visual communication tools. And that's the other thing that we're going to be learning about is trying to improve our visual communication skills from whatever baseline you are at. Those of you that are more advanced in that, hopefully you'll increase your skills and you get a little bit better. Those of you who are just beginning, just being introduced to visual communication, again, hopefully you're going to increase your skills and get a little bit better. We're going to be creative in this class. I want to get a lot of creativity going. I love that creative energy that we can feel as we're just kind of letting loose, cutting loose, and so forth. And we want to have some fun in this class. I want to see you have fun. And as we move forward, just be excited about creating. You are going to need a few things for the class, so I just want to go over this short list. Make sure that you're aware of what you're going to need. First of all, you're going to need access to the latest version of Photoshop, and that is available through K-State if you have not already got your license secured. K-State does offer a bit of a discount for Photoshop and the rest of the Adobe products. Just go to this website right here that you see on your screen, and you'll be able to get a discount through K-State. And it's the same license that you would get through Adobe. You just get a little bit of a price drop if you go through K-State. So please do that. You're going to be needing a textbook. We will be using a textbook, but the one that we're using is the Photoshop Classroom in a Book. And it's a very hands-on workshop type of book that will just kind of walk us through exercises very similar to the ones that we'll be going through together. And so you'll be able to get some good walk through or follow along instructions in some different techniques in Photoshop. So make sure that you get that. I try to keep all my textbooks fairly inexpensively new. This is available for just 40 bucks on Amazon. Hopefully you've already gotten yours, you got it in hand, and it didn't cost you too much. Okay, I don't like expensive textbooks. Of course, you're going to need internet access, and if you're watching me on this video right now, you already have that, I sure hope. We're going to be accessing Canvas, and then you're going to be doing some image searching on your browser, and so you'll need internet access as we go through that. Also, you will need Zoom. You'll need some access to Zoom, and that again also is available through K-State, no charge to you. We'll be having some virtual office hours, and I'll be available also at other times as make an appointment with me through Zoom. So I want to make sure that you have that access as we move forward also. I've already scheduled a virtual office hour session and provided that link for you on Canvas. So look for that. So what should you expect each day for class? First of all, I want to let you know that class is Tuesday through Friday over the next 3 weeks. Okay, we will not be meeting on Mondays. You might use that day to do some work, but because of the Labor Day holiday, we're starting on a Monday, and then I've got a couple other conflicts on Mondays during this time. So we're only going to be meeting Tuesday through Friday. So those are the class days for us for this class session. What you'll see is a pre-recorded video lecture from me. These are designed to be a follow-along type of thing. So make sure you get your images together and have those accessible. And as we move forward, I'll go slow enough that you'll just be able to follow along. Hopefully you'll be able to get through this with a reasonable amount of sanity left in your brain. Okay. After we go through an exercise together, I'm going to ask you to do a similar exercise on your own. And I want you to make sure that you save and upload these assignments or exercises as a PSD image. Okay, PSD is the Photoshop extension, and I will want to see all of your layers, all of your work that you're doing. So don't flatten your images before you upload those. I want to see that PSD file that you've been working on so I can see exactly what you're doing and be able to give you some feedback on that. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, also, I'll have some virtual office hours so I can answer any questions during that time, and I can help you out with anything that you want to help with. Or we can just kick back and get to know each other a little bit better and shoot the breeze if you want to do that. I'll be available during those 2 hours that are posted on the syllabus. So we will go ahead and take care of that, and I'll be available for you to ask any questions. I'll also give you plenty of time to work on your projects and your assignments. I don't want to make you feel pressured. Creativity is stifled when we're under pressure a little bit, so I don't want to do that for you. I want to give you a lot of time to be creative and have fun with that. We're also going to share some information with our classmates. One of the things that I'm going to ask of you is that you present a short lesson on a technique or a tool or some type of thing that you have learned about Photoshop on your own that is different from what we're learning in class. There is so much to Photoshop to learn. It's a deep program, and there's lots and lots of stuff to learn. We're not going to have time to learn all of it here in this class. We're just going to scratch the surface. And by the way, did I mention I want to see lots of creativity? I want you to have fun while we're going through all this. Let's look at what to expect from this course in general. Okay, as I just mentioned, you're going to be asked to do a personal presentation for the class. You can do this through Zoom. Zoom will allow you to screen record. It'll record yourself from a camera. If that's the best tool for you, then go ahead and do that. If you have another tool that you want to use to create your presentation, that's fine as well. But you'll be each asked to upload a video presentation that you can share with the class, something that you have learned outside of class about a technique or a tool in Photoshop that you'd like to show off. I'm going to ask you that you provide each of the images, the baseline images, unedited images that you're going to be using in the class so that the other classmates can follow along with you and learn along with you. There will be 3 tests that I call lab assignments because they're very hands-on. These lab assignments will be treated as tests in terms of scoring, but I'm going to ask you to accomplish certain tasks within Photoshop. So no multiple choice answers or essay answers or anything like that. You're also going to have a small group of final images, 2 or 3 images as a final project. This will be designed for you to show off all of your Photoshop skills and show me what you have learned through watching or learning Photoshop through taking this class and getting familiar with Photoshop. Daily attendance. This will be a little bit tricky because we're all online, obviously, but I will be checking Canvas, and I will be expecting to see that you visit Canvas each day to be able to access the materials that are there. So make sure that you check in, and I'll be watching that closely. I want to see you there. And I'd like to see you also during my virtual office hours. I think that'll help both of us to improve the quality of the class. We will be needing to meet deadlines. I've got deadlines that are all lined out in the syllabus and the schedule right down at the last page. Deadlines are a real part of the media industry and the design industry. So I want to make sure that we follow those deadlines. There are no exceptions. I do not take late work. So make sure that you are submitting your work on time and that you meet the deadlines that I've outlined. If you have a problem with that, if there's some emergency, please contact me as soon as possible so that we can get arrangements taken care of. But typically, I'm not going to make exceptions for not meeting deadlines. So those of you that have not experienced Photoshop before, you might be saying, what exactly is Photoshop? I hear all my friends and other people talking about Photoshop and so forth. Why is it important to be familiar with Photoshop? Well, Photoshop is the industry standard graphics creation and manipulation package that is available out there. Most people in industry are familiar with and use Photoshop to varying extents. You'll see some people that use it daily. You'll see other people that use it occasionally, but it is used in the design and art background industries and careers. So as you get ready for your jobs and moving into your careers, you'll want to be familiar with Photoshop. Photoshop is what's called a vector or a raster software program. Some of you may be familiar with those terms, vector or raster. We'll explain those a little bit further later on in this presentation. So I want you to get familiar with those and kind of have a baseline understanding of what those mean. And Photoshop does use both of those. It's used for design, it's used for photo editing and manipulation, and we can even edit video in Photoshop, and we'll get to that towards the end of the class. Photoshop is a standard software, go-to software for many photographers, graphic artists, web designers, and other professional illustrators. Later on in the course, coming up in the next week or so, I'll have a friend of mine dial in and share some things that he does as a design professional using Photoshop. So it is an important program to be able to use. Our version, you should be using Creative Cloud 2020, and that link that I shared with you earlier on, if you need to get access to that, you can go to that link and you'll be able to access Photoshop Creative Cloud 2020. You might be wondering, what exactly can I do with Photoshop? Why is it such an important program to know? Well, first of all, you might use it for graphics creation, for print products, for web products, and possibly even video products that you would be exporting out for various uses. The other thing you can do, which is actually one of my funnest things that I do in Photoshop, is photo restoration and photo editing. I love restoring photos that have been damaged. Maybe you've got some available to you. You've got some pictures of your grandma or your mom that were taken way back in the day, and maybe you want to embarrass them, but you want to dress that image up and make it look really nice again because it's been faded, or in some cases maybe it's got some water damage, or maybe it's got a tear or something like that. You can fix all that stuff using Photoshop, and that's a fun thing to do. We'll get into doing that. You're also going to be able to manipulate images using layers, filters, text, and other tools that are found in Photoshop. You can do all sorts of crazy things to your images. You can do all sorts of things to your images, and you can really have a lot of fun. Some things will be a little bit twisted and crazy. Other things will just be a necessity to make an image the way you want. And by the way, you'll be able to impress your family, friends, and neighbors. All sorts of people will be excited if they know you know how to use Photoshop. So let me show you some examples of things that people have done in Photoshop. Some of these are a little way out there and weird, but that's why I wanted to show you some of these examples, just because we want you to know we can do some crazy things, we can do some fun things. So up in the upper left-hand corner there, you see just a real simple logo that has been created using Photoshop. It's very easy and simple, and got a nice looking background. And you can imagine that this company has a real classy feel to it. The next image is a little bit crazy. This guy has been having a little too much fun, whoever the artist was for this, and he's making this guy in the image kind of eat himself. It looks like it's really kind of nutty. Not sure what the message is there, but somebody had an awful lot of fun. Just like the image down there in the lower right-hand corner, somebody went a little bit crazy with former President George Bush and singer Britney Spears, and kind of got them together and insinuated that they had a baby together. That's kind of a crazy image. Again, twisting and turning the images, blending several different images together, and looking at all sorts of funny things there. The two images up above George and Britney, one is a book cover, everything Photoshop, and it's just showing you the cover of a textbook that gives you some tips and tricks about Photoshop. That next image is a simple image. It's just a TV icon. And then as we jump down to the lower left-hand corner, you see those two images of the sailor. One is a before, and the next one is an after. That is an image that has been repaired and restored, so you can get an idea of how we can do some image restoration there. The next thing we can do is we can take images that have been either underexposed, overexposed, or both, that just don't quite have the right look to them. We can go in and make some corrections and find a final composite image that really looks nice and is much more visually pleasing. And you can see the differences there, the positive aspects of each of those images as we combine the underexposed with the overexposed images. So I promised you that we would go over some basic design principles. That's the next thing that I want to do, is just review some of these things, just so you kind of have them in your mind and that you're familiar with what's going on there and you have an idea of where I'm leading you down. So the first thing that we want to kind of study is how people look at visuals. Most of you are probably going to be familiar with the rule of thirds. You see that rule of thirds diagram on the left-hand side there. And as we look at dividing our image both vertically and horizontally in thirds, we have these imaginary lines that go through our image, and they create these intersections. These 4 blue dots represent those intersections. And the rule of thirds basically states that at those intersecting points, those are where the points of interest are for our image, and the viewer's eyes are going to be drawn there. But there is further research that goes even a little bit deeper into how people look at visuals. And I'll show you a little chart here in just a moment that demonstrates this. As we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, we see that a viewer will actually look at that quadrant, that red quadrant. That's what gets about 40% of our attention as viewers. We look over in that area a lot more. 25% of our attention is drawn to that blue area just below that. The yellow area only gets about 15% of our attention, and then about another 20% or so comes in that green area. So this is why you might see, if you're looking at a magazine advertisement or something like that, that has a disclaimer, a lot of pharmaceutical ads, maybe some alcohol ads, things like that, that have disclaimers to them. A lot of times that disclaimer is found down there in that yellow quadrant that only gets 15% of our attention. Designers know that, and they don't want you to pay too much attention to those disclaimers, so they put them there in that lower area. Now, this whole theory of where we see more often. This is based on culture to some degree. As we look at the next image, you'll see this is where our eyes go. Eye tracking research has been around for quite a while. And here in this diagram, you can see this guy wearing his eye tracking gear that's keeping track of where his eyeballs are looking. And in that chart there, you can see exactly where his eyes look. And they kind of wander around that red 40% quadrant quite a bit before sloping down to the lower left area that gets about 25% of our attention, scooting then over to the right lower quadrant where he touches base there just a little bit before his attention slides back up the right-hand side. Now, why is this cultural? It's cultural because it's based largely on how we read. So in the United States, we read top to bottom, left to right. And so as you notice this, it kind of follows that pattern of left to right, top to bottom. Now, in countries where they read differently, for instance, in Asia or the Middle East, they might have a different pattern for where attention is drawn to a particular image. In the Middle East, for instance, they read right to left, top to bottom. And in some Asian countries, they actually read top to bottom, left to right, or top to bottom, right to left. And so they will look at images a little bit differently. In this shrinking world that we have, you may in your career end up doing some design work for a client that is based in one of these foreign countries that read a little bit differently than we do here in the States. So you want to be aware of that as you move forward. The next thing that we need to be aware of is colors. Color design is really important. Here you see a color wheel that represents the color spectrum. And specifically, this color wheel, I chose this one specifically because it highlights the color modes that we will be working in. Those of you that have worked with pigment-based colors, such as paint, are familiar with the primary colors being red, yellow, and blue. And that is true when we're dealing with pigment, but in our case, we're going to be dealing with light quite a bit. And so our primary colors actually are these three here within that triangle that you just saw pop up. Red, green, and blue are our primary colors. And our secondary colors are in this triangle here, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And so those represent the two different color modes of RGB and CMYK that we will be using in Photoshop. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we move on, but I want to talk a little bit more about why we use color in the first place. Obviously, we live in a world where color exists, and those of you who are coming from the art department and do a lot of artwork already are familiar that color suggests moods. There's a lot of things that we can suggest to people just simply by color. Blues, for instance, are melancholy types of feelings. Yellows and reds, oranges, those are a little bit more bright, sunny, and happy colors, and so forth. Colors can also indicate movement within an image, and they can heighten realism. Colors might also point out some similarities and differences within an image. Oftentimes, maybe you've seen those games where it asks you to point out or identify differences between two very similar images. Sometimes you can base those on color. Sometimes you can use color to highlight information, whether it be text or other objects within an image, and those point out similarities and differences as well. Colors are also very emotional and can create an emotional response on the part of our viewer. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to use color, and they do a lot of good things for us. When we're talking about text specifically, here's some things that are really interesting. First of all, warm colors seem to approach the viewer. They kind of pop out a little bit more and reach out to us as viewers. Cool colors, on the other hand, they tend to recede and kind of back off a little bit. And so depending on the message that you want to send about your text, do you want to make it pop out, or are you going to want it to recede and pull back? Also, when we're highlighting, we typically want to highlight in warm colors because that warm color will kind of jump out toward our viewer here. So you see that little yellow box there in the lower right-hand corner. Typically, we see highlighters that come in yellow. That's kind of the default color for a highlighter. Ironically, some people have a very difficult time seeing yellow. My wife, for instance, doesn't see well out of one of her eyes, and so it makes it difficult for her to see contrast, and she has a very difficult time identifying yellow highlighted text. So she always uses pink or green or some other color in highlighting for her text. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody that writes a sign using a yellow highlighter, and they'll write it on white paper, and you can hardly read it because there is not enough contrast there to be able to see the differences. So be aware of those things as we use color as well. Now, I told you about different color modes. Told you about red, green, blue, or RGB, and CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And those color schemes, color modes, are used for very different purposes. For instance, RGB is a light-based color mode. Sorry, it should be mode, not model. It stands for red, green, blue, and this is this color scheme that is used for the web and for video. So anytime we're dealing with electronic screens or electronic images, we're going to use an RGB color scheme. The CMYK color process is one that is used primarily for print. And print uses these four primary colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and mixes those to varying degrees to print images. One of the first times that I saw this color mode in use, I remember as a kid, when I finished my box of cereal one time, I took that box and I broke it down and got it ready for the recycle bin or something like that. And I noticed these four squares where there had been a flap that had been glued down underneath. You couldn't see it when the box was whole, but once it broke down, you could see these four squares. One was cyan, one was magenta, one was yellow, one was black, and I always wondered what those little squares were for and what they meant. Well, what they are is a test for just the basic colors that are then mixed together for that print image. And so when we're dealing with an image that is going to be printed for its final use, then we want to use the CMYK color mode. If it's going to be an electronic use, then using the RGB color mode is most appropriate. The next thing that we're going to run into is we're going to be using fonts or typefaces. And as you probably already know, there are dozens or even hundreds of different typefaces out there that can be used. They all fall into two different families. And those two different families are what we call serif fonts is the first one. And a serif font, some standard ones that are used commonly are Times New Roman, Garamond, and Bodoni. And each of the serif fonts have a little tail at the beginning or the end of them. Look at that S there at the beginning of the S. It has a little flare or a tail at the beginning, and you slope down to the end of the S, and there's another one. You see it on the R as well, and the I and the F. The E kind of gets away without it a little bit, as does the O, but all the rest of the letters, typically we will see a tail on them, and that's what's called a serif. The next family is what we call sans serif. Common fonts there are Arial, Helvetica, or Myriad Pro. Of course, there's lots of others that fall into both of these families. Sans, the word sans is Latin for without, and so a sans serif is without a serif, or without that little tail. And you can see as you look at those typefaces, they're all a little bit more straight and blocky, very simplified, and don't have a lot of frill to them. So these are the two font families or typeface families that are used in any kind of a design, and how they apply to us as we look at basic design principles. Typically, we don't want to combine in a single design a serif font and a sans serif font. It's just typically not a good technique for design, and it's not real visually appealing. So as we create and we start getting into the use of text, then this is something that you want to pay attention to. Try to, it's okay to mix up different typefaces within your design. Just stay within the same family, whichever one you use, serif or sans serif. And the other thing that we can do with typefaces is we can do some emphasis. There are 4 different ways that we can emphasize different text, and we'll go into those here as we look at the 4 different ways. First of all, we can italicize our text, and you're probably familiar already that italicizing text makes it lean slightly to the right and creates a little bit of contrast to the text around it. Now, if we create large blocks of text that is italicized, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to read, so we want to be aware of that. It is just intended to emphasize a short word, phrase, or maybe a sentence or 2. But beyond that, then we probably don't want to use that much italicized text. Same thing with bold. Bold makes a thicker, heavier weight text. As you see here, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Again, large blocks of bold text become a little bit difficult to read for our viewers, so we want to be cognizant of that, and we don't want to give them material that is difficult for them to read. Along with those 2, we can also underline our text. Underlining our text we have to be careful with also, because underlined text usually indicates that there is a web link connected to that text. So if we're using underline as a way to emphasize, we want to be cautious with that, and we don't want to confuse our reader to making them think that we are providing a web link. And so we might want to use instead colored text. And colored text is a great way to highlight or emphasize our text also. But again, we want to be careful with what colors we are choosing and make sure that those colors contrast with our background significantly enough that it can be easily read. So we want to make sure that those color combinations are pleasing to the eye and drastically different from our background so that they can be read easier. Okay, we talked earlier about different file types. We talked about raster images and vector images. And this website that I have listed here, I'm not affiliated with it. It gives you a nice explanation for the differences between raster images and vector images. 99designs.com gives you a short little explanation there. And this is how they explain that. Raster images, those are made up of pixels. Pixels are small little blocks of color that are assigned different colors within our color mode, whether it be RGB or CMYK. And each pixel represents a dot of a particular color, and they can only get so large. And so the more pixels or the more dots that we have within our image, then that increases the resolution and allows us to increase the size of that image. But once they reach maximum size of 100%, if we start increasing beyond that, then our image will start to pixelate or gets blocky or fuzzy, as some people call them. The pixels are becoming much more noticeable, and we can see them as the blocks of color that they are. So we want to be cautious there. We don't want to increase the size of our image larger than the pixels will allow and get them to start pixelating. Vector images, on the other hand, allow you to resize the images or the elements that are vector, and you can go and make them almost as large, endlessly large. Typically, vector files are found within these file formats of EPS, AI, and PDF. These are associated with different Adobe programs. EPS files are typically those that are used within InDesign, and AI files are typically used within Adobe Illustrator. PDF files are a little bit more universal. You can find those in use in Photoshop as well as many other Adobe products. You can also see them as documents that you just read, but they can be imported into Photoshop or some of these other programs and be able to be used. If they are saved as vector images, then you'll be able to see them and enlarge them and do all sorts of things with them. And so we have different file extensions that we want to pay attention to. The PSD file format or file extension is a Photoshop file that has all layers intact. This is the common file format that we're going to be using mostly in this class. Remember, you want to submit all of your files, all of your assignments as PSD files. So make sure that you are doing that. Both of these groups fall into raster or vector images. Raster images can include any of these other 5 file extensions: JPEG, GIFs, PNG, TIFFs, and RAW. And you might think that they just work interchangeably and the one is just as good as the other. Well, it really depends on what you are doing. JPEG images typically are the best combination of small file size with high quality information. And so they're really good to be used for web along with print, photos, and quick review of images. It is a very common file type that is used in many different ways. GIF images, on the other hand, allow for transparency and animation. I'm sure you've all seen the animated GIFs that are available through our smartphones as we text and send messages and so forth. The problem that GIF images have is that they are limited in the colors that they offer. So if we need more color added to our image, a PNG image is a really good one because it still allows that transparency, but also offers millions of colors. It doesn't allow for the animation that a GIF does, but does allow for many more colors and the transparency. So those are nice files to work with as well. TIFF images also provide a high quality print format for graphics, and if you're scanning an image, a TIFF file format is a good one to save to as well. The RAW files are files that typically come from digital cameras, and each digital camera manufacturer has its own file extension for their RAW files. For instance, I use a Nikon, and the Nikon extension is a .NEF extension. Canon, Sony, and all the other digital camera manufacturers will have their own extension for their RAW files. RAW files are much larger in size than any of these other file extensions. That's because it includes all the unprocessed data and information that is available for that image. And so if you are a photographer and you're going to be manipulating your images quite a bit, a RAW file is actually a great place to start from, and then you will probably end up finishing that as a JPEG, a TIFF, or any of these other file extensions. The vector images, we've already talked about each of those, the PDFs, the EPS, and the AI files, all vector type of files that we might use either in Photoshop, in Illustrator, InDesign, or any other Adobe product. Now, we've talked a little bit about resolution in our images. What makes resolution is the number of pixels per inch, or sometimes it is called dots per inch. Dots per inch is typically a terminology that is used related more to printing, the printing process. But Photoshop uses the term pixels per inch. So we've already talked about what a pixel is. So how are they used? Different pixels, different amounts of pixels, I should say, are used whether your final product is going to be used for web and video or whether it's going to be a print product. A web or video image is typically only going to be 72 pixels per inch. That is the resolution that is used for video and typically on the web. The web allows for higher pixels per inch images. You can get away with around 100 is kind of the sweet spot, but video only uses 72 pixels per inch. That's the maximum that you can get out of video. Print products, on the other hand, you want to use 300 pixels per inch. That is the standard resolution used for professional printing. If your images are not 300 pixels per inch, then they will come off looking grainy or blurred, and that's not what you want as a professional designer. So make sure that your images and all the elements within those images are using at least 300 pixels per inch if they're going to be printed, and you'll print them cleanly. So through this presentation, we have reviewed all of these different principles for visual reading of images, how people see images. We've talked a little bit about color design. We've talked about color formats. We've talked about font and typeface design and file formats or file types, including file extensions and how we might use those. And we've also just talked about image resolution. So those are all very basic elements of what we need to understand at a basic level anyway, in order to be successful in our design of images in Photoshop. At this point, what I'd like to do is meet you over in Canvas in order to show you how I have constructed our Canvas page. So as we look through the Canvas page, I've tried to make this quite simple and easy for you. If you will just go to the modules section, actually let me, I'm going to go into student view. And as we're in student view, what I'd like you to do is just go to modules. And as you get into modules, you will see almost pretty much everything that you're going to need to know and need to access. I will be putting all of the images that you'll need to have access to and all of the lessons here in modules so that you can access everything quite easily right there. The only other thing that you might possibly need to access is the files. So if you go into files, I have organized things here. The image folders, these are the images for the exercises that we'll be doing together. That will be an important one. You'll see that they are associated with each lesson. They are numbered and named. You'll find some of them have the same number. For instance, image folder 5 color, and we have image folder 5 masks and blending. That just means we'll be using both of them for that lesson. So image folders are typically where we will find the files that we'll be using in the work that we will be doing together. When you have a lab assignment, you'll go into the lab assignments area and you'll have images there in the lab assignments. Again, I will try to put those up in the modules so that you can access those easily. The other thing that you will want to look at, though, is clear up here at the top, the Adobe lesson images. And in here, the Adobe lesson images, these are all of the images that correspond to your textbook and the images they use there. Of course, if you have the textbook, it will guide you as to where you can go in order to access those files online, but I already have downloaded those and placed them here within Canvas just to make it a little bit more convenient for you. So once again, though, modules is the place you want to go, and that's going to make it the easiest for you. Once again, I'm excited about this class. Hope that you are as well. I hope that you're looking forward to being creative, having some fun as we get going. I know the first lessons might be a little bit slow, but it's learning essential information. As we get going, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to get creative and have fun. I'll see you in the next lesson. Glad you're here, and be creative, have fun, and we'll see you next time.